Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. When you watch a football game, especially a nationally televised one like Monday Night Football, you expect to watch the entire thing. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it gets, or no matter what delays happen, you're going to be able to see that game from start to finish if you want to. When it comes to a national game like a primetime one, it's difficult to imagine the idea that a network would cut away from the ending of the game to show some other programming. Fans would be outraged, the league would be outraged, and I think it's safe to say that the network would have a lot of explaining to do. However, what you might not realize is that in 1997, this actually happened. On September 22nd, 1997, the Jacksonville Jaguars played the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football. And unless you were in the stadium, no one saw the true ending of the game. There is no footage of how the game ended, because ABC cut away from the game before it actually finished, leaving many people incredibly confused when they woke up the next morning and realized that the final score was not the one that they thought it was. And this is the story behind one of the strangest broadcast controversies in the history of Monday Night Football. Before I talk about the controversy in question, we need some context to understand the importance of this game, how it was going, and perhaps most importantly, how everyone thought the game actually ended. It's week 4 of the 1997 season, and we're down in Jacksonville for this absolutely critical Monday Night Football game between two division rivals. Oddly enough, this is not the first time I've talked about the 1997 Jaguars and the 1997 Steelers, as they were involved in a bizarre tiebreaker controversy later in the season, where the AFC Central was decided by 5 tiebreakers. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. For the Jaguars, they entered this one at 2-0, while the Steelers were 1-1. If the Jags won, they'd maintain first place in the AFC Central. Also for the Jaguars, this was their first ever appearance on Monday Night Football, so the stakes were pretty high, as this was one of the first times ever that the whole country was watching the Jaguars play. And let's just say there's a reason that many Jags fans who were there at the time still remember this game as one of the greatest regular season games in the history of the franchise. Heck, roughly a quarter century later, it might even be number 1. The Jaguars scored 2 touchdowns in the first half, with Natrone Means punching in from a yard out to give the Jags an early 7-0 lead, and Jimmy Smith scoring on an 11-yard touchdown early in the second quarter. At halftime, Jacksonville led it 17-7, although the Steelers were not going away quietly into the night. Cordell Stewart threw 2 touchdowns on the first 2 drives of the second half, as after hitting Yancey Thigpen from 4 yards out and Mark Bruner from 1 yard out, the Steelers had their first lead of the game, leading it 21-20. With the Jags trailing in the fourth quarter, things looked bleak, especially after Mike Hollis missed what would have been the go-ahead field goal from 38 yards out. But Jacksonville got the ball back, and after starting on their own 20-yard line, they were able to get it all the way down to Pittsburgh's 8-yard line. This time, Hollis redeemed himself, and with just over 4 minutes left in the game, hit a 27-yard field goal to give the Jaguars a 23-21 lead. Pittsburgh had one last chance to answer, and they were eventually able to get it down to Jacksonville's 22-yard line with 6 seconds left. The Steelers were about to line up for what looked like a 40-yard field goal. What happened next was one of the most iconic moments in the history of the Jaguars franchise. No matter what happened here, this was going to be the last play of the game. If the kick was good, then the Steelers would win it. They would leapfrog Jacksonville to standings with a head-to-head tiebreaker, and they would silence what might be the loudest that Alltel Stadium has ever sounded like. If the kick was no good, then the Jaguars would survive in unbelievable fashion. Stepping up to kick it was Norm Johnson, a 2-time Pro Bowler who hit 85% of his kicks over the previous 2 years. And now, it's time for Al Michaels and company to take it away. Roll the tape.
A bad snap. And it's blocked! There's a bad snap. Sweeney snapped it. It was a bad snap. And
Chris Hudson just sent the entire city of Jacksonville into an absolute frenzy. Of course, most people remember this play as the time that Bill Cowher tried to trip Hudson on the run back, which amazingly enough would not be the last time that a Steelers head coach tried to trip a player on special teams. But with that touchdown, it was all over. The Jaguars won the game. Everyone was celebrating, interviews were being conducted on the field, players had left, and ABC had signed off. Take a listen to how the broadcast ended.
The Jaguars win it. The final score is 29-21. Until next Monday, Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, Dan Deerdorf, Lynn Swan, good night from Jacksonville.
There was just one small tiny problem. The game wasn't actually over. Today in the NFL, under the rules, the ending to the Jaguars-Steelers game would be correct. That would have been the final play of the game, and the Jaguars would win it by a final score of 29-21. But for the longest time, It wasn't like that. If a touchdown is scored in regulation, then by rule, no matter how significant or insignificant it is, the extra point must be kicked. The league changed this rule after the Minneapolis Miracle, when by default, the Vikings had to line up for an extra point attempt. Everyone realized just how stupid that was, and how anticlimactic it was for a game to end like that after one of the greatest plays in the history of the sport. So the rule was scrapped the following year. This meant that in 1997, by rule, the Jaguars had to kick the extra point. There was just one small problem. Not only had both teams left the field by this point, thinking that the game was over, but ABC had signed off. Everyone at the network thought that the game was over, and both teams thought that the game was over. Back then, Monday Night Football didn't have a post-game show on ABC, as they threw it to the local news straight after. And the game started at 9 o'clock Eastern, so by the time this whole incident happened, it was well past midnight. ABC thought they were in the clear, and that it would be business as usual, like the hundreds of other times they've signed off from Monday Night Football to transition into the next program on the schedule. However, that's where they were wrong. Because even though everyone had left, from the fans to the players to the broadcast, the NFL ordered both teams to go back on the field 15 minutes after ABC had signed off and ordered the extra point to be kicked. In other words, even though the Jaguars had won the game, and even though nothing regarding the extra point could have changed the outcome of the game was not over. There was still one more play. Remember that after the whole Heidi game fiasco from roughly 30 years before, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, networks had to stay with the game until it officially ended. And now, ABC was in a pickle. They had three options for how to handle this situation, and no matter which one they chose, there was going to be outrage. Let's look at all the options at ABC's disposal. Option 1 was to cut away from the news and go back to Monday Night Football to show the extra point. However, you can see why a lot of people would have been upset about that. The game was already running long, and it was past midnight. People were waiting for the nightly news. And now you're going to cut away from the news when people are trying to learn about important things going on to show an extra point that means absolutely nothing? It messes up all of ABC's programming for the rest of the night, since the game was running long to begin with. Look at all the people that get upset when a network cuts into their programming for something important in a potentially life or death situation, like a tornado warning or a flash flood alert. So you can only imagine the outrage that would ensue if a network cut into a program for something as insignificant as an extra point in a football game with no time left to turn an 8-point game into a 9-point game. Option 2 was kinda bold, but it would have been to show both the news and the game at the same time, and do a split screen, whether it is to either split the screen right down the middle, or to show the extra point in the corner of the screen and alert the viewers with a message on a ticker at the bottom of the screen as to what was happening. Seems like a win-win, right? The football fans are happy because the play is being shown, and the people watching the news get to continue watching that. However, this also poses a problem. For one, this is 1997 that we're talking about here. The average TV size in 2021 is a whopping 55.5 inches. Back in 1997, it was 22 inches. Going split screen on a TV that total area-wise is 525% smaller than the one you probably have in your place right now is not going to look good. Plus, you can imagine how this could pose a problem with the subject matter. Showing a football game while having images of a burning house, or while having the news anchors talk about someone tragically dying, seems incredibly insensitive, and there would be outrage about that, and rightfully so. You can just imagine how awful something like this would look from an optics standpoint. On top of that, if the affiliate in question is that commercial, I'm sure the advertisers would not be too happy that no one is paying attention to the ad, as their ad is sharing space on the screen with a football game. Option 3 was to just not show the play at all. No one would see the extra point except for the few fans who stayed around in the stadium 15 minutes after the game was done. However, just like the other two options, you can see why a lot of people would have been upset about that. For one, a lot of people would be confused when they woke up the next day and saw that the Jaguars beat the Steelers 30-21 instead of 29-21. By choosing this option, this is incredibly unfair to newspaper companies all over the country, because the newspapers will print the correct score 30-21, and you get people calling the paper and complaining that they got the score wrong, even though it was right. Additionally, it screws over anyone who placed a bet on the game. Yes, the line was Jaguars -3, so the extra point didn't change that no matter what. And yes, the over-under was 40.5, so the extra point also didn't change that no matter what. However, there were a lot of people that had teaser cards. I'm not going to dive too much into how teaser cards work, but basically, there were a fair number of people that had the Steelers at +9. At 29-21, those people win. At 30-21, those people push, or in the case of cards where a tie is a loss, those people lose, so that mattered a ton. But most importantly, you can imagine how upset the NFL would be at this. They have a contract with ABC to televise every Monday Night Football game in its entirety. and last I checked, because the extra point still had to be kicked, the game was not being shown in its entirety. ABC was potentially breaking its contract. No matter which option ABC chose, there were going to be people that would be upset. You were not going to avoid outrage. Pick option 1, and you upset the news teams and the people watching. Pick option 2, and you risk a PR nightmare and upset both groups of people, because again, TV screens are so small that a split screen just wouldn't look great. Pick option 3, and you confuse a ton of people the next day when they see the actual final score, you upset the NFL, and you make a ton of bettors who thought they won angry when they realized that they didn't win, and have no idea why because they thought the game was over. So what did ABC decide to do? After consideration, they decided to go with option 3. Over 20 million people watched the Jaguars play the Steelers during this thrilling Monday Night Football game. But in terms of how many people truly saw it end, the number is probably somewhere in the hundreds, maybe the low thousands if we're being generous. Because the extra point was only seen by the players and staff members, and whoever was left at Alltel Stadium 15 minutes after the game was over. No one saw it on television, hence why there is no footage. There is no available video of Mike Hollis kicking the extra point and making it a 30-21 final score. And after the game, after the confusing ending, and after the highly controversial decision, ABC knew they had to put out a statement. Spokesperson Mark Mandel said, "With all the confusion on the field, we had no choice but to give it back to our affiliates. In the world of television, the reality is every second is worth something, and every minute is an eternity." He then added that even though he understood people's frustrations, he knew that he made the right call. As he said, "I can understand where people who had a financial interest in the game would be upset, but we were already running long, and with players and coaches having already left the field, a decision was made to throw it back to the affiliates." However, it didn't alleviate any of the initial confusion, especially in Las Vegas, where on KTMV Channel 13, the sports director gave the incorrect 29-21 score, saying that he never knew that the extra point was kicked, and he couldn't get it confirmed in time before going on the air. There have been many blunders in the history of Monday Night Football, but this is one of those moments that I'm not sure if there's anyone to blame from an ABC standpoint. If anything, the refs are to blame for not saying that the game isn't over, and for creating a situation where both teams left the field. If the referees knew the rules, then this whole controversy never happens. ABC, considering the circumstances, probably had no other option but to kick it to the local news and then hope for the best. Fortunately today, nothing like this can happen again. Take this past Monday's game between the Chicago Bears and Minnesota Vikings. Even though the Bears scored on the final play of the game, because of the new rules, the game was over, and the extra point was not kicked because it meant absolutely nothing to the outcome of the game. So we will never have to deal with anything like this for the foreseeable future. But back in 1997, when the Jaguars won by 9, when a lot of people rightfully thought that they won by 8, a lot of people were perplexed in one of the strangest controversies in the over 50-year history of Monday Night Football. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.